In the absence of a ceasefire, the United Nations has been pressing parties to agree to a set of humanitarian principles that would allow for aid to flow to the millions living on the edge, even before the latest fighting erupted.
The Secretary-General welcomes the signing by the parties to the conflict in Sudan of the Declaration of Commitment to protect civilians and guarantee the safe passage of humanitarian aid in the country. While humanitarian workers, most notably our local Sudanese partners, have continued to deliver in very, very difficult circumstances, the Secretary-General hopes that this declaration will ensure that the relief operations can scale up swiftly and safely to meet the needs of millions of people in Sudan. He reiterates his call for an immediate ceasefire and expanded discussions to achieve the permanent cessation of hostilities. The UN will spare no efforts to assist in the declaration's implementation and will continue to deliver humanitarian aid, ceasefire or not.
The detailed declaration of commitment includes pledges from both sides to respect international humanitarian and human rights law, including distinguishing between civilians and combatants and between civilian objects and military targets, to allow and facilitate unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief and personnel, and observing the implementation of regular humanitarian pauses as needed, among other parameters. Hoping to arrest violations by both military factions.
I strongly condemn this wanton violence in which both sides have trampled international humanitarian law, notably the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. The Sudanese military has launched attacks in densely occupied civilian areas, including airstrikes. Last week, one airstrike reportedly hit the vicinity of a hospital in the East Nile area of Khartoum, killing several civilians. The RSF, meanwhile, has allegedly taken over numerous buildings in Khartoum to use as operational bases, evicting residents and launching attacks from densely inhabited urban areas.
More than 730,000 people have been internally displaced since the fighting between Sudan's armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces began almost a month ago, while the UN has warned that in the absence of a truce, more than 800,000 could flee the country.
This is the first time that we have a mutual declaration on something, which is not a ceasefire, but a mutual signed declaration of the two warring parties on respecting international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and some more concrete provisions like vacating hospitals and medical facilities, which is good. And of course, the aim is to have a ceasefire which is also mutually agreed, which I hope would give more stability and more respect to a ceasefire than when it is only based on unilateral declarations.
The United States, which is co-hosting the talks in Saudi Arabia, says they will now focus on reaching an agreement on an effective ceasefire of up to approximately 10 days to facilitate the humanitarian agreement. Referring to a step-by-step approach agreed by the parties, subsequent discussions will be focused on a permanent cessation of hostilities that has to date been out of reach for the belligerents. The UN has been clear that any notion of a military victory for either side would be a miscalculation. Sherwin Bryceby's SABC News, New York.